Welcome to Brussels Forum 2020. We are pleased to introduce the Vice President for Foreign Policy at the German Marshall Fund, Dr. Ian Lesser.
Good morning and good afternoon from Brussels. Welcome back to this 15th edition of Brussels Forum in its virtual guise for this month. And this week we're focusing on our conversations on critical choices, critical challenges facing societies on both sides of the Atlantic and globally. Let me thank at the outset our partners once again. Our founding partners, Daimler and the Belgian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, our forum partner, Deloitte, and all our associate and supporting partners and knowledge partners. We're very, very grateful to them. And also today, a very special thank you to ExxonMobil for partnering with us on this conversation today. Yesterday, we had a very engaging discussion on climate change, climate policy in general. And today we have an opportunity to continue that conversation with a more specific discussion around the Green Deal and whether it can be the backbone to COVID-19 recovery. And we have a wonderful group of very distinguished people to have that conversation with us today. I'll let our moderator introduce them in a moment, but let me end by introducing our moderator, Nick Gowing. Welcome back. Nick is the founder of Thinking the Unthinkable and a longtime friend of GMF and the Brussels Forum, and we're really delighted to have him moderating this session today. And with that, thank you all again for joining us, and Nick, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian. And maybe I can start this by paying a personal tribute to Ron Asmus, who was one of the driving forces behind the Brussels Forum 15 years ago, where I was invited along with others to a new idea. No one was quite sure how it would fly, and look how it's flying now, sadly virtually at the moment, but look at the dynamism that even virtual sessions can create. So let me remind you what Ian has said. This is about the Green Deal as the backbone to the COVID-19 recovery plan. And that's what we want to debate, both where it's going in terms of the positives, but also in terms of the potential negatives and the anxieties there are, generated as much by employment and economic prosperity and prospects because of the awfulness of what's happened under COVID-19. For those who are not close students of the Green Deal, just before we get going, let me just quote the beginning of the Green Deal so that people realize just how all-encompassing it is. To deliver the European Green Deal, there needs to be a rethink of policies for clean energy across the economy, the industry, production, consumption, large-scale infrastructure, transport, food and agriculture, construction, taxation and social benefits. To achieve these aims, it's essential to increase the value given to protecting and restoring natural ecosystems, to the sustainable use of resources, and to improving human health. It's all-embracing. And careful attention will have to be paid when there are potential trade-offs between economic, environmental, and social objectives at this time. Well, let me introduce our first speaker. What I'm going to do is introduce each of them right at the beginning and ask them to just give 1 minute in an answer to my question. And first of all, let me introduce Cristian-Silviu Buzzi, who is a member of the European Parliament from Romania, who's Industry, Research and Energy Committee member, also chairman of that committee. Cristian, is this now a no-brainer that people realize the Green Deal is the way forward?
I think that Green Deal is even much supported at this moment as a political decision at the EU level. Green Deal is an important strategic goal for the next decades. It was highly and largely supported by almost all political groups. And even that at the beginning of the crisis, there are some rumors that maybe things will change. What I saw, what I experienced in my committee, the committee that I'm chairman, and also in the European Parliament, and also in the European Commission, is that the support for this pathway for Green Deal is reinforced. So we'll continue to go on this way with the intermediary targets, which is still to be discussed, with the transition, which is not clear, which should be discussed again, but with the final objective of climate neutrality in 2050. And I think this road is irreversible.
Thank you. Back to you in a moment. Megan Richards next. Until recently, Director for Energy in the Directorate for Energy at the European Commission. Megan, the same question to you. Is it really seen across Europe now by the 27 nations as a no-brainer?
I think that it must be, because the European public was very much in favor of addressing the climate change issue during the COVID lockdown, which every European country has had to some extent or another. People have noticed already the significant change in reduction in air pollution, of course, a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Many people, unfortunately, have not been able to go to work, but those who could work, many of them could work from home. So they've seen the impact of what can happen when things are done differently, which is not to say we should go into lockdown forever, of course, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I think we can see that to get the economy going again, we need to have public support, private sector support, and every individual is going to have to do his or her own thing in order to get things back up and running, but in a sustainable and climate-friendly way. So I think the Green Deal goes together with other actions under the multi-annual financial framework, and this is really going to drive forward what many people are calling building back better.
Thanks, Megan. Let me read that paragraph again. Careful attention will have to be paid when there are potential trade-offs between economic, environmental, and social objectives. Let's now get a view from someone representing all workers inside the European Union, to Luca Visentini, General Secretary of the European Trade Union Confederation. Luca, would you say that the Green Deal is essentially a no-brainer with a very fair and strong wind behind it? You need to unmute, Luca, please.
Really sorry.
Go ahead.
Fairness and just transition are the essential component, to convince workers in Europe that the Green Deal is in favor of them and is giving to them good possibilities and opportunities for the future. Because I will say there is very large awareness and even passionate support to climate action among workers, but at the same time also a lot of fears about the possibility that climate action and climate transformation can also lead to massive job disruption, of course. And these fears have been boosted and increased, of course, by the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and outbreak. So now the point is what kind of conditions we can put in place for the Green Deal to be successful. And in this respect, I think there are three elements that play a role for workers. The first one is how we can make sure that the Green Deal protects our industry and our economy by transforming it and is not going to destroy the economic potential of the single market. The second element is to make sure that if unavoidably some jobs will be destroyed, we can create more jobs than the ones that are destroyed and better jobs through massive investment, but also through smart investment. And the third element is how to accompany workers in this transformation, making sure that not only they will be offered another job opportunity, but at the same time they will also have some safety nets to protect them in this transformation when it's going to happen.
Right. Well, let's talk about those trade-offs in more detail shortly. Let's go to our fourth panelist now, who's Philippe Duke, who is president of ExxonMobil Europe. And of course, Philippe, your company historically and practically now makes its money from fossil fuels largely. What do you see as the Green Deal? Do you see it now as a no-brainer, which you in the corporate sector really have got to grip as a new reality, which is going to massively affect the way you operate?
Well, we clearly see that the economic environment, economic prosperity, and the need to address the environmental impacts of what we do go hand in hand. We cannot choose, we shouldn't choose. We have to do both. The real question is how do we do that? I think the Green Deal provides a great path forward. The key question is, what will it take to succeed and how can we, private sector, contribute to this? When I look at where we are, on one hand, I think Luca said it very well, we're seeing impacts on job, investments, government and private sector finances as a result of COVID-19, and they are very significant. It will be very important to rebuild consumer confidence as well as put people back to work as quickly as possible. On the other hand, it absolutely doesn't mean that the climate agenda has disappeared. on the other hand. We need to make sure that climate and energy is and will continue to be one of the major challenges of our generation, what we need to solve. And I think when you put that together, we all share the same aspiration. We all share the aspiration for a world that is clean, safe, and prosperous. What we see as key to success is technologies that still need to be developed or that need to be deployed. And it's really working with across the board, with the Commission, with the Parliament, with representatives from employees who have done an outstanding job addressing COVID-19 and keeping the economy running during the crisis. And I really hope we'd have a chance to talk a little bit more about what is this technology challenge we face to make the Green Deal a reality and how we should approach it.
Well, let me go to Cristian, and I should say that Cristian has to leave in about 20 minutes for another appointment. So thanks for being with us and squeezing us in, Cristian. What about the fact that there are large numbers out there who think that greening somehow means they're going to lose their job and their livelihood? What is your committee thinking about that? How do you persuade those who somehow think that green's a dirty word, which is going to disadvantage them, that actually there's an enormous advantage, given the results of the European election last May or a year ago, which made it very clear before COVID that there was a massive investment in people's mental commitment to the issue of sustainability and climate change?
Yes, first of all, sorry that I have to leave. I'm honored to be in Brussels Forum. It's not squeezing in, it's just the fact that at 4 o'clock Brussels time, it was announced a meeting with all the chairs of committees to decide which committee takes which piece of legislation from the recovery plan, which is also a lot supporting Green Deal. And in my way to this important meeting, I have to go live to Romanian television to explain something about what is happening here in Brussels. But yes, I believe that there are a lot of worries that some of the requirements related to Green Deal will go to lose jobs, and this is a worry in many countries. Romania is one of the countries where, for clear, because we have to give up to the coal industry, for instance, in the next decades, we have to pay attention on this. Poland is another European important country, heavily dependent on coal and on other fossil fuels, where the concerns are very high. Even from the most developed and old members of European Union, there are concerns about this. And my political group, European People's Party, which is the largest political party in the European Parliament, puts a lot of emphasis on two issues. First, that every transformation, every goal that we are deciding should be based on a solid impact assessment. So even for deciding what is the goal for 2030, for instance, because now it's proposed between 50 and 55, the reduction in order to become climate neutral in 2050. So even for this goal, we need a solid impact assessment, and we wait for European Commission impact assessment, which will come at the beginning of September, I believe. So this is an important point that it's also very much supported in ITRE committee. Some other committees are a little bit more enthusiastic to Green Deal and more green, if you allow me to say this in the political approach. The second issue, very important for me and for many of my colleagues and for my political group, is that we should not lose jobs. We should not lose competitivity. We should remain, we should take also into account the affordability of prices for energy, because you cannot increase the costs very much. And now this is even more true, more actual in the new context of the economic crisis that will sure come and follow the medical crisis. So on these three issues, we have to build everything that we will decide. And I believe that we could reach our target of 2050, but also not to push very much, not to exaggerate, not very much, to find a balance, to understand that we need a transition, that, for instance, gas should remain a transition fuel, that also we should invest and develop renewables, but couldn't go only with this. And also, of course, we should pay attention to our jobs and our companies, right. European and international companies.
Could I jump in on that, Nick?
Please do, Megan. Yes.
May I? Yes, I appreciate very much the issue about the jobs. Obviously, we don't want to lose jobs, but it's clear that the coal sector, for example, in Europe has only about 180,000 jobs, whereas the clean energy sector in Europe has over 1 million jobs. Luca very clearly said we have to find new, better, more sustainable jobs. It's absolutely clear. In the green sector overall, let's call it that, not just renewable energy, there's something like 4 million jobs. This is the way of the future. We will find new and better ways of finding better and healthier jobs for people in the future. As an example, my grandfather died in a coal mine. I don't want people to have to live in such circumstances. But again, relating to prices, I wanted to make a small comment here too. We've seen that oil prices, gas prices are extremely low right now. This is a perfect opportunity for member states to stop inefficient subsidization of fossil fuels right now. They've never been so low in the last, let's say, 20 years. Of course, many, many years ago, they were even lower, but this is a good time for them to use their public finances more efficiently. And this is not to say that we should have people who can't afford energy, the energy poor or energy poverty. Those people, of course, need to be supported. But generally, we have many ways of addressing this. Renewable energy, for example, is much cheaper, generally speaking, than something that is imported or has to follow a world price. So just those comments.
Good, thank you. Let me pause at that point. Luca, can I come to you? Because impact assessments, we've just heard from Cristian. Do you believe that impact assessments will be very clear about the impact on employment and the welfare of your members?
Well, yes, but we should avoid to go for, let's say, general principles and general assessments, because what Megan said is true, of course. For renewable energies, there is more market and there are more jobs potentially than for a mine or for traditional coal production. But at the same time, you know, these economic activities are on the ground, in the reality, in communities. And we have seen too many cases in the past of local communities being destroyed and transformed into social and economic deserts because there was not a plan on how to manage the close down of a mine or for a steel plant or any other kind of high energy consumption industries. I mean, if there is not a plan, it means simply that people oppose at the beginning this transformation, and then the transformation happens in any case, and then the only solution you can find is simply that you put in pre-retirement the workers that were involved in that situation, and then in that community there is no more any economic activity that can really replace the one that has been closed down, and there are no jobs for anybody, including for the young people that are obliged to leave the communities, to leave the regions, and to look for something else somewhere else. So in this sense, it's very important that this kind of impact assessments are very focused and very concrete and pragmatic in addressing the problems in the communities where the problems are going to happen in the short term, medium term. This is the point. This requires a lot of dialogue, a lot of capacity of projecting the future, and also a lot of cooperation in terms of financing, job creation, and social protection accompaniment.
Thank you. All right, now, Philippe, I'm going to come to you immediately, but I want to encourage anyone watching that you can send us questions. We've got first questions coming in on Brussels Forum at gmfus.org or hashtag Brussels Forum, or on the live stream on YouTube. So you can be part of this debate for the next 40 minutes. Philippe, one of the points you wanted to make, because we talked beforehand, was about the level of technological readiness in all of this. What is emerging now on the statistics and the data on how technology is ready or not for the Green Deal?
Yeah, well, that's a very important point. And I was going to introduce it by saying, and by also talking about the importance of energy system modeling and impact assessment, because there is this old saying, when there is a will, there is a way. I heard it in one of your webcasts. And here there is a will, but there is hundreds of ways. And trying to understand which one is the best one or what one we should enable is very important. And we are really running a marathon here. You need to think about, I think about the energy transition and addressing climate change as a marathon we started to run 20 years ago. and we have 30 years ahead of us before getting to our objective. And we really need to make sure we are heading in the right direction. And one organization, the International Energy Agency called the IEA, is tracking progress, and they have a tool which they call the Tracking Clean Energy Progress, which they report on a regular basis. Their last report came out earlier this week. They are tracking 46 technologies and sectors and looking at how they're doing versus a scenario that brings us to the Paris objective. Out of these 46 solutions, 6 are on track. And by the way, those include electric vehicle and solar panels. 24 are making progress but are not on track. We're behind, and those include things like hydrogen and energy storage. And 16 are behind schedule. They're even described as being off track. And things in that category include CCUS, carbon capture and storage, or transport biofuels, the next generation of biofuels. And when you look at that, you say, well, we are on track for 6, making progress on 24 and behind on 16. What will it take to move forward? And I think Megan was alluding to that. You really need 3 key things. You need the technology to make progress. You need the enabling regulatory framework, and you need the infrastructure, because in some cases we'll have to build substantial infrastructure. The bad news is we're not yet there. The good news is we know what we need to do. What is sure is that there is no silver bullet. It's not one technology that is going to get us there. We need to find a way to develop those in parallel, enable them, and deploy them at scale. We have a role to play. We can talk about that in a minute. Definitely developing technologies is what we do for a living. And we're working on some of those technologies, especially those which are far behind where they need to be. And I think, as it was said, the success will come from ability to doing all this while enhancing competitiveness and attracting investment.
Philippe, are you saying that over-optimism? Is that what you're saying? I mean, given we're talking about the impact of the COVID crisis on the Green Deal, look at the speed at which people have been changing, innovating, transforming in the last 3 or 4 months. Extraordinary, particularly in the medical field and so on. Isn't it possible that even if you say a lot of the technologies are not yet ready, that actually this is going to be a boost to make sure the science and the productive capacity is going to be there?
No, it definitely highlights the need to accelerate. I mean, if you look at one simple number, we started that journey in France. In Europe, we look at 1990 to today, how much progress we have made, 0.6% per year in terms of emission. What we're trying to achieve in the next 10 years is 6 times that rate. It's a huge step change. That's what we're trying to do. That's what the Green Deal is about. And I think we have a lot of opportunities on the technology front to accelerate and deploy. Some of those technologies are ready. They just need the policy support. They also need acceptance from the public. But some of those technologies are ready and can be accelerated. It's a question of how do we make the infrastructure ready and the investment attractive so that it attracts private investment.
Megan,
could I come in on that point again?
But I was going to say, you're no longer in the commission, therefore you can speak freely.
Exactly.
Do you believe there's over-optimism, or is this actually going to be a generator and a target to head for at high speed?
Are you speaking to me?
Yes, indeed, yeah.
Yes, good. Yeah, I want to just underline something that Philippe said, and that is it's not one solution that is going to get us to 2050 net zero. As he said very clearly, there are many different
Megan, I think we've lost. Just go back 2 sentences, can you? We just lost you for a moment. Go back.
I was just saying that what Philippe has said, that there are many different technologies and many ways to achieve net zero. This is also clear in what the Commission had said. There are different options of achieving net zero, but they need to be combined. So we have to work in all these areas. And those of you who followed this horrible thing, I'm sure.
Megan, we're not having luck. Okay. We're not having luck. I'll have to pause you for a moment. There may be just a bit of pressure on your bandwidth at the moment. But Cristian, you've got to leave in 6 minutes.
Digital aspect is another important one.
It'll get much better, of course. We're hearing you now. Just finish your thought quickly, can you?
Yes, just quickly to say that research and innovation is one of the important support elements under the multi-annual financial framework. And this is clear also in the Green Deal, that these aspects have to be supported, as well as some of the issues that Luca has mentioned about social change and support to families and regions that need assistance in achieving their goals.
Luca, let me come to you before I go to Cristian before he has to leave. Luca, what kind of point would you like to put to the chairman of a critical committee at the European Parliament on those critical issues of industry, research and energy, which you'd like him to take away?
Well, I think it's very important to shape sectoral and regional plans, because as I said before, the interconnections between the most polluting industries or energy productions and the supply chains that are linked to that across the sectors, these interconnections are very complex. So it's not enough to say we need to invest in technology. Of course, this is absolutely a precondition, but it's also very important to go through the processes to see how the supply chains can be transformed in an holistic way, and how this is going to impact the different sectors, the different regions, the different economic systems. All this is very complex. That's why we are asking the European Commission at the moment as social partners, not only the European trade unions, but also the European employers organizations, to sit down around the table by involving our affiliates on the ground to really shape and design concrete plans in detail on how this transformation can be managed. All these elements that we have mentioned, technology, industrial innovation, the capacity to create new jobs in also different sectors to transform the supply chains, but also, of course, social protection, etc. All these elements are important, but they have to be included in concrete plans from transforming the different supply chains and sectors. In this respect, the role that the businesses, not only the big enterprises, but also the small and medium enterprises in the supply chains can play is absolutely essential. We cannot have a reasoning without involving those that are going to be affected. So the role of businesses and employees associations is really crucial in this respect, in my opinion.
All right, Cristian, let me ask you before you go, and then please step aside if you feel you have to. I think back to a couple of weeks ago when the European Commission announced its 750 billion euro recovery initiative to bounce forward. And given what you've brought together under your committee, this is a moment for repair and preparing for the next generation, a fast forward on the twin of greening and digital transition. Are you getting a sense that this is an amazing moment of takeoff, of liftoff, or that politics is going to get in the way of this at a critical time and opportunity?
Well, I believe that there is a momentum. I'm not sure if this is the only one. It's clear that now we need to invest, and it's wise to invest in the technologies of the future than to put our money from recovery plan or from the next multi-financial framework, multi-annual financial framework, or MFF, or budget for 7 years of European Union in all technologies and in all habits. It is clear that is a momentum, but in the same time, we have to be balanced. It's clear, and I agree with Philippe, that there is no single technology which will replace the old technologies, and we don't have final answers. We have a lot of opportunities in the electrification. We have a lot of hopes for hydrogen as a good answer for our future in different areas and in an energy field. Of course, we'll have to deal with many technological aspects. It's clear that solar and wind were a real success and will become more and more affordable. We have the Just Transition Fund for those regions which are now depending on coal. So we have answers also for new capacities of production in those regions, and also for the jobs, for the professional requalifications. There are answers, but we need to be realistic, to be balanced, to be based on impact assessment, to be bold also, not to forget that we need to decarbonize our economy, and also not to wait that we need a transition. And we have two questions on the question and answer platform about the natural gas. Yes, I totally support that the natural gas should remain the transition fuel, and not to ban the investments in the natural gas in the coming years. And also, as the last question, and it's important, we cannot go alone as European Union. We need partnerships, and we need other important global players to go in the same direction. So climate diplomacy, energy diplomacy should be another important direction that we should go in the coming years.
Thank you, Cristian. Why don't you step aside, and thank you for joining us. So there are now three of us, and we will ask those questions in a moment. So Philippe, let me come to you, picking up on what Cristian was saying there. But also, there may be some who are saying it's interesting that you, as ExxonMobil, are supporting the Brussels Forum, and you are investing heavily still in carbon-based fuels. Help us understand what may appear to many as a contradiction at a time of such significant change and public expectations.
Well, I think what's most important to understand is people need the fuels we use today. They need them today. There is no alternative. If I want to go back home tonight, I need to have gasoline for my car. We're going through a transition. And when you look at this, the market for gas, the market for oil, these markets, depending on the scenario you look at, but based on the current nationally determined contribution, the plans by the countries, the demand for oil is still growing. Grew last year, while we're going through obviously a big dip this year, has been growing, and depending on what scenario you assume, may be growing in the next decade, 2 decades. Or if you go for a very fast decarbonization, you will still need a substantial amount of oil in 2040. I was just looking at one of the scenarios called the Sustainable Development Scenario that the International Energy Agency puts together every year. Their forecast for oil demand in 2040, consistent with a pathway to the Paris Agreement, is 67 million barrels a day. If you overlay on top of that the fact that natural decline of oil or gas production for oil is in the range of 7% per year, for gas is in the range of 5% per year, to meet that demand, there is a need to continue to invest. That demand exists. So it may not be very visible in Europe, because in Europe, we have already started to reduce our demand on oil. And while gas continues to be an important part of the mix, as mentioned, it is not declining either. The rest of the world continue to grow. And I think that's what we probably need to talk about as well, is climate change is a global issue. Demand for energy is growing outside of Europe. Emissions are growing outside of Europe. And we'll have to find a way for Europe to contribute also and help others to decarbonize. Otherwise, we'll have addressed 10% of the problem, maybe shown the way to the rest of the world. But there is a lot of other things that need to happen to get to a global climate neutrality, not just European climate neutrality.
Megan, is that how inside the Commission, when you were Director for Energy, that was being seen inside your area, in your directorate?
Well, I think it's clear, and this I mentioned already, the late 2018 Commission proposal on how to get to net zero by 2050. That was a communication. I think one thing that's absolutely clear, we have to stop using oil for fuel. And I'm not talking now about Europe. Philippe clearly said what's going on in Europe is a little bit different from what's going on in other parts of the world. But there's some countries that still use their domestic oil supply to create electricity. Saudi Arabia, for example. I mean, even they are moving towards solar. They have huge other renewable resources to generate electricity. And oil can be used for other essential purposes. And again, transition over time. So I think it's really important to look at how this is going to take place over time. And here, the regulatory pull, we'll call it, is where the innovation and decarbonization can come from. So when organizations like the European Union establish targets for renewable energy, establish targets for energy efficiency, and I'm sure Philippe will confirm this, on energy efficiency, there have been huge gains by industry. Where we need to make even more progress is in individual households. There's a lot of potential. Building stock is relatively old in Europe. It could hugely benefit from better insulation, better use of the existing systems. And that creates jobs as well for Luca, something for Luca.
Philippe, your response?
No, absolutely. I think oil is unique in one sense. It creates a very dense liquid fuel. And it should be used for that, not to make power. It should be used in transportation. It should be used in the production of petrochemicals. And that's where the future is. And that's where the long-term demand will be staying until those can be replaced by low carbon fuels. If you're interested, we, with our refining organization in Europe, trade association called Fuels Europe, publish a low emission document on liquid fuels to explain how we could get there. The thing is that some of those products are very hard to replace because they are very unique properties. And yes, in power, they can and should be replaced. In transport, it's going to be harder, especially in aviation, in marine, in heavy duty transport. as well as feedstock for petrochemicals. So we're going through that transition. There are some easy things to do. This is a good example. Another one is to replace coal by gas, and then go to low carbon gases, which is the next step, much harder, but you can do big steps going forward. But I think, no, what Megan said was very right.
Can I just interject, because Doug Hengel has asked, and I'm going to move into questions here, 8 countries from Central and Eastern Europe have underlined to the Commission the importance of natural gas to their energy transitions and energy security. How will natural gas be treated under the Green Deal? Both you and Megan, please, and then I'm going to come to Luca as well. Philippe first.
I think that's an open question. That's definitely a debate which is currently going on. There is a clear understanding that if you can replace coal by gas, you reduce emission by 60%, big step, but you don't go to zero. And I think in a world where, in a region where we're trying to get to zero, the question is what comes next? And that's where the question about low carbon gases, that's where the questions about hydrogen come up, and why we need these technologies to develop and then be ready to decarbonize gas as we go forward. But I think there is definitely a strong need, especially in Central Europe, where we need affordable ways to reduce emissions quickly. And that's definitely a very important option we have.
Megan, quickly on gas.
Yes, just to add to what Philippe said, it's clear that there is going to be an effort to try to decarbonize gas. It's not to say that gas should be increased and used even more. And it has a very important role as a substitute for coal, for example, and in some areas where other sources for the time being are not as inexpensive and easy to access. But over the medium and longer term, it's also going to have to decarbonize. And as I said as well, there is still going to be a role for gas as foreseen by the Commission's communication on the 2050 net zero. But decarbonized over the longer term. I mean, just as an example, in Jerzy Buzek's territory in Poland, which is Silesia, where the COP24 was held in Katowice, that's an area where coal mines were closing in Poland and being replaced with other actions, other new jobs. And so the regional aspect there was very important, just to underline what Luca had said about the importance of bringing new jobs and new activities to these areas.
And one big coal mine has just closed down, or one big investment has been withdrawn there recently in Poland. Luca, let me put to you this question from Griffith Kauser, I hope I've got it right. There was a lot of talk about environmental assessments. It's picking up Christian's point. Yet after the support to mitigate unemployment risks in an emergency financial package passed after the COVID-19 crisis, many EU countries, Hungary, Slovenia, and others, have eliminated environmental impact assessments in order to fast-track projects aimed to boost employment. How do you reconcile the Green Deal with this drive to boost the economy? Where do you sit in that, given the enormity of the expectation on the Green Deal, but the pragmatic issue of jobs and income?
Yeah, I was exactly going to spot that question to you, because it was very interesting what the question was asking. You know, the risk of having a tendency to come back to business as usual after the COVID-19 outbreak and the crisis in terms of economic recession and unemployment that this can create is very high. So we have to be very careful. I think that the real game changer in this respect is the enormous amount of money that the European Union has already mobilized with the emergency measures, and is going to mobilize even further with the recovery plans. This money has to be used to reconcile the need to protect jobs and to create new jobs with the need to invest on environmentally sustainable economic activities. A lot of this money will go to companies, also to member states, of course. It has to be conditional, you know. This money can really create a lot of economic activities, can save a lot of companies, can also save a lot of jobs. It has to be conditional to the fact that this new investment has to be targeted to the Green Deal objectives. This is the point. So with all this money available, it's possible to make compatible the Green Deal objectives with the need to restore the economy, to protect the jobs that exist, and to create new jobs to replace those that are going to be destroyed. So I think think we are really in the perfect momentum, if you want, to take the opportunity to put together these objectives and to protect people and businesses on the one side, and on the other side to accelerate even more the possibility to reach the targets of the Green Deal.
But Luca, do you accept what Megan said about 15 minutes ago, 180,000 in the carbon-based energy creation, but in the clean fuel business, well over 1 million across Europe? In other words, that's the growth industry, and that's where workers of every generation can be reskilled.
I hope even more, because if you look at the figures of temporary and permanent unemployment that has been created by COVID, we have now 60 million, 60, 3 times the effects of the financial crisis, 60 million workers that are either in temporary or permanent unemployment because of COVID. We need to create, many of these people will come back to work. We really hope so, and we are quite sure it will happen. But in the end, we will have not few million, we will have some tens million jobs destroyed by this crisis that come on top on the risks generated by climate change. So we need really to have a massive investment for massive job creation. And I'm convinced that in the greener parts of our economy, there are a lot of opportunities in this respect. But again, we need a plan. We need investment, appropriate investment, well-targeted investment in technology, and also particularly this kind of governance to be established at the European, national and regional level to accompany this process in the proper way. Then we can make it, I think.
All right, well, keep the questions coming in. We've got just about 17 minutes to run. Megan, let me pick up on this point. Again, you're not in the commission anymore, but you'll have seen a lot of paperwork. Is there really a sense that there can be a fantastic multiplier by generating jobs and infrastructure and investment in the clean energy business in ways which will overcome the kind of concerns represented by Luca and also representing his members?
I think so. And don't forget that digital goes hand in hand with energy and the Green Deal as well.
Very clear 3 or 4 weeks ago by the president.
Yes, and I think that's when my Wi-Fi stopped working. Someone was trying to call me at the same time. But let's not forget, renewable energy is not just wind and solar. We have all sorts of other areas where we have to decarbonize and where new innovations and new technologies will have a role in hydrogen, in storage, in CCUS, if that works, and it works at scale. There will be all sorts of new interesting areas that we can explore. And by bringing the digital sector together with the green sector, I think there will be a lot of the new jobs developing. Of course, that will require new skills, it will require assistance, but the assistance does not just come from the public sector. It comes from the private sector, which has an interest and a desire to work in this area as well. If you ask most big banks, Philippe will confirm or deny this perhaps, many big investors don't want to invest more in oil and some in gas these days. They want to invest in new green technologies. So individuals as well want to have new dynamic, innovative jobs. So there's certainly the potential to have a sustainable development that is green and successful.
Philippe, do you feel under pressure at ExxonMobil? We saw the announcement last week by BP, by Bernard Looney, the new chief executive there, of writing off of 17.5 billion of assets and the possibility of marginalizing many of the fields, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, BP realizing that the only way forward is in renewables and clean energy.
I think we all apply the accounting rules that apply to our country and an area of where we do accounting. So I can't comment on what BP had to do. We can tell you that we do appropriate accounting and we reflect the value of our assets on our books.
But there's a direction. There's a direction.
Yeah, that was going to come to that. And I think we definitely see a trend towards these lower carbon technologies. And that's why we're investing our technology money into that. Our technology money, including in CCS, I was very interested to hear Megan mention that. That's a technology we practice for 40 years. We've been practicing the technology for 40 years. We know how to do it.
You think it works now?
not only we think, we know it works. We have been doing it for 40 years. We have captured 40% of the world's carbon since the technology was developed. We know what it takes to make it even cheaper, because one of the challenge is that technologies like that don't come for free. They add a cost to your operation. And without some form of support, or without some form of strong carbon pricing, these things are not affordable in the current environment. I really like when Megan said the price of oil and the price of gas is as low as they have ever been. There are things we can do. And the things we have been suggesting for years, for a decade, as a matter of fact, is to put a price on carbon. When we use a hydrocarbon, when we use gas and oil, we emit CO2. This CO2 has a cost to society. The best way to recognize that is to put a price on carbon. You can call that a carbon tax. We like to call that a carbon dividend, because we think it's very important from a social fairness standpoint that the money goes back to the people, so that we create an incentive, but we create a solution that will ultimately help the most unfavored to go through that transition, which otherwise could be very difficult.
Nick, can I just come in on that?
Please do, Megan, yes.
Just to mention that one of the aspects of the Green Deal, of course, is the carbon border adjustment, which is very important, which goes hand in hand with what Philippe has mentioned. And of course, I mentioned, I think at the very beginning, the emissions trading scheme in Europe, which has been adjusted and amended and improved. And the price of carbon as a result of that, and plus other things, of course, went from about €4 a ton to about 24, 25. I don't know where it is right now. I haven't looked today. But this also is an important factor in making CCUS viable, usable, etc. And again, I'm sorry to come back again to this paper that the Commission prepared on getting to a clean planet for all, but CCUS was identified as a technology that probably will be necessary in order to get rid of the residual amount of greenhouse gas emissions that can't be got rid of by any other means by the time 2050 comes. Now, 2050 is a long time away, and perhaps things will change. But given current technologies and estimates of where we will go and the composition of energy in our energy mix, that was the assessment of the Commission at that time as well.
And is CCS cost effective? Because for many years, of course, even though Philippe has said it, we've known about it for 40 years, and you've been testing it, etc. In the end, it was not seen as cost effective for a long time. What's your assessment from the Commission?
Well, again, that is primarily because of the carbon price. Where does it work? It works in Norway. Why? Norway has established a carbon price of 60 euros a ton. Well, it's probably in kroner, but the equivalent of 60 euros a ton. So the Norwegians have seen that it can work. Look, I'm not a proponent and I'm not pushing for CCUS, but I think, as Philippe said, the important element there is the price of carbon. What is the price of carbon? And that, like so many things, if you ask about oil, what's the price of oil, that will have a determining factor on many, many other things.
Could I ask all three of you to be quite brief in your answers? I've got quite a few questions, and I'd like to reflect the kind of things that are on the minds of those who are watching you here. First, from Reinhard Butikofer, MEP, asking Philippe and Luca, by how much should the EU reduce its level of CO2 emissions by the year 2030? He puts the idea of 55% or more or less. Luca.
I think exactly this. But of course, to reach this, we need all the things we were discussing about. I mean, it's not something that happens just overnight. I mean, there is, again, I repeat what I already said. We need a plan. And for the moment, I mean, we have good principles, good ideas, a lot of money theoretically available, but still we need to go through details. Devil is in details. I'm not sure we are still there in this respect.
Philippe.
You know, it's not for us to decide what society should be doing. It's our role to support society in its meetings, its objective. And therefore, 50-55, we know that's the debate. We know what the impact assessment will say. We're looking forward to seeing what the impact assessment will say. And that should be the basis for the decision. I think as private sector, we're enablers. We don't decide what society should be doing.
Nicholas McLean, does the panel see a role for nuclear energy as a source of green energy? What's your view on that, Megan?
Well, obviously, I don't have a personal view, but I can tell you again, in the Commission's 2050 communication, it's clear as well that in order to achieve net zero by 2050, nuclear would continue to have a role in part of the energy mix for Europe overall. And this, again, is something that individual member states determine very much according to themselves. The Euratom Treaty establishes all sorts of safeguards and security and safety provisions. But you know, there are, and I'm not going to name them, there are some countries in Europe that don't even want to hear the word nuclear, others that are driving forward new innovative ways of improving and making more safe nuclear power. So it's really something that is very much up to each individual member state, and that's reflected in the treaty as well. But the Commission communication identified the continuation of a percentage of the energy mix being nuclear as an important factor in reaching the 2050 net zero.
And obviously in Germany, there's been this toing and froing between abolishing nuclear, investing in coal, investing in wind. It's a very difficult mix. It's a very difficult balance between public anxiety and the technical and investment. There are companies who are in trouble now for having invested in coal. Megan.
I'm sure that's the case, but
okay. Let me ask Philippe and Luca. Philippe, the issue of nuclear.
Yeah, we definitely, when you look at what energy solutions we have, low carbon energy solutions, nuclear is one of them. And we see growth in China, we see growth in other parts of the world. It is one of these low carbon energy solutions we have, and it is one that is not intermittent, which helps address some of the challenges that come in wind and solar. So it is part of our, when we look at our own forecast, yes, nuclear is in. That's not the technology we practice ourselves, but we definitely see a role that the nuclear can play. Building on what Megan said, the issue with nuclear is social acceptance, like many other of those technologies. If social acceptance is not there, it's not going to be deployed. If social acceptance is there, it's probably going to be part of some of the energy mixes of some countries in the future. You see it being deployed in Central Europe in particular, when the discussion about what to replace coal with, well, that's definitely an option.
You mentioned China, of course, but they're opening several new coal-fired power stations every week, in addition to opening nuclear. I come from a country, live in a country where it's quite probable the Chinese will be building the next generation of nuclear reactors here. Well, what about that? There's still that urgent demand to use coal in a country like China, even if they are moving a little bit towards nuclear.
You know, if you look at the challenge of climate change and emissions globally, that's the best thing we can do, is to make sure that those coal-fired power plants are not fired by coal, but by gas or to something else. This is the highest emission technology there is. I know China is looking at CCS, as putting CCS behind their coal-fired power plant, and they have a lot of coal. But ultimately, in some of the IEA analysis, they really showed how much difference we could make in making sure that we don't build coal-fired power plant. And if we really need the power in a form that you can pilot, then go for gas.
Luca,
can I add one point there, Nick?
Could I just hear from Luca first,
please? Yeah, of course.
We've got 7 minutes to run. Luca, nuclear.
Well, the large majority of our members are against nuclear energy production. But if I have to tell you my personal opinion, and of course, the large majority of our members being against has a lot to do with social unacceptance Philippe was referring to. But my personal opinion is that it's not about being against or in favor. The problem is what level of security and safety this kind of production can ensure in Europe. And when we discuss about this, we cannot consider only the European Union, you know, because we have a lot of nuclear plants outside the borders of the European Union, especially in the east of Europe, we don't have any control about. So, I mean, if we want really to be serious on nuclear energy, we need to address the problem of security and safety in a global dimension. By the way, this is not only true for nuclear energy, it's true for all the elements that are linked to the Green Deal we are just discussing.
Megan.
Yes, thanks. I just wanted to add something about China and the global view on this. I mean, Philippe is absolutely right about what China is doing in terms of coal plants, and Nick, you mentioned this as well. But China is also establishing huge but enormous solar-powered fields. I mean, I think they're bigger than anywhere else in the world. Perhaps Saudi has equally big ones. So the potential is really there. I think an area where the European Commission was working very actively with the Chinese was on improving the regulatory framework in China to make sure that renewable energy could be better integrated into their electrical system. I mean, they have an unusual system in the sense that each, I think they're called provinces, not states in China, aren't they? They don't interconnect. So they have their own system within each state or province. And this creates lots of interesting challenges, let's call them. So one of the things that the European Commission and the External Action Service, of course, has to do is work very much on the global diplomacy, official development assistance, and other frameworks in order to make sure that these benefits that we can see from the green revolution can be picked up and administered and implemented elsewhere.
Thank you. We've got 5 minutes to run. Let me pick up another couple of points which I'm going to bring together. But firstly, and this is for you, I think, at the beginning, Philippe, no name here. COVID has shown the need and willingness to cooperate. Can this mindset be continued for the Green Deal, or will competition prevail? And I'm asking you that question just literally 3 days since Paul Polman chaired the Building Business Resilience call for action, showing that really business is moving forward and talking to itself much more and being prepared to put its feet forward much faster in some ways than the politicians. What's your view about the mindset of cooperation and a willingness to cooperate, Philippe, as opposed to competition?
I think it's a very important one. There are parts of the business where we have to compete. That's what competition laws are about, and we have to compete. But there are definitely areas like technology development, like how do we address climate change when we can, and do work together. As the oil and gas industry, for example, we have this oil and gas climate initiative where 13 of the biggest oil companies in the world are working together to develop and deploy technologies and support the development of policy frameworks that help bring those forward. And we're part of that. And these are just going to grow with time. We see a lot of value in doing that. As I said, our refining industry association here called Fuels Europe is working on clean fuels for all. And we're working together to help put the policy frameworks that are required to support the development of that kind of fuel. So I definitely see that. And I would say it's not just between competitors or between industry players. The cooperation will be absolutely key with policymakers and other stakeholders, and obviously representative from our employees, because as industry, we can do a lot, but a lot needs to happen as we work with policymakers to have the right frameworks in place.
Thank you. We've got 3 minutes, and can I ask you all to be very brief in what you say? I don't know who asked this, but is there enough trust in decision makers and industry experts to really get citizens on board for this? Luca, your last thought, please.
I think not yet. There is a lack of trust among citizens, among workers, among even businesses, because a lot of very ambitious objectives have been launched and being agreed, but very often without a proper involvement of social partners, employers and trade union associations, organized civil society organizations. So there is really a need to open up more and more to dialogue and to proper involvement of citizens organizations, because we cannot deliver these objectives without a proper involvement and trust in the society, I think.
Philippe, Exxon, do you recognize that you can't just do what you want? You've got to recognize that the public wants a voice in this now and expects decision makers and politicians to show that how strong that voice is now.
Well, absolutely. I think when you think about what our role is, our role is to meet society's needs. It's not to define society's needs. And that's what we do. Society needs
shareholders too.
And shareholders, but they're part of society. So it's meeting that broad group's expectations. And what's great about that is at this time, they have great aspiration. They're pretty clear. The question is how to meet those aspirations working with other stakeholders. We can't do it on our own, but we can definitely participate, and we have a very important role to play. So I hear what you have to say. I think it's an exciting time to be part of that debate. And the dynamic I can see in Brussels right now is absolutely fascinating. There is a lot of discussion, a lot of opportunities to input, a lot of opportunities to interact, and to try to define what the Green Deal is going to be in terms of implementation to make it successful. There is a recognition. It's a very aspirational, high hurdle objective, and everybody needs to find a way to participate to make it a success.
Megan, final word from you, if you can. You're now a visiting senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund. You're no longer in the Commission. But when you look at the impact of the European elections last year, could you feel a dramatic change inside the Commission? Not least the expectation that Timmermans, the Vice President, would produce the Green Deal within 100 days. Can you feel a real new engine room of activity and realization that even the Commission was behind and therefore was not really honoring the expectation of trust from the people?
I'm going to disappoint you because I think there was already a real steamhead to move forward on these climate-related issues in energy, on the climate legislation, and that existed before the European Parliament elections. I'm not saying that what happened at the last elections was not a good thing or had no impact. I think it gave an extra spurt to what had already existed and was moving forward. And that's a very good thing. And it reflects very much, as I said at the beginning, what public opinion in Europe is. And I think, quite frankly, that this COVID pandemic has given everyone an opportunity to see how governments, private sector, and individuals react in very difficult circumstances. Not always perfectly understandable, perhaps not preferable, but at the end, let's hope that we address this properly. And by bringing everyone together, and I include everyone, not just the member states, but Parliament, Council, industry, stakeholders, etc., I think we can do something similar in terms of addressing the green revolution and making sustainable development a reality for all of Europe, and encouraging the rest of the world to do so too.
Thank you, Megan. Megan Richards, Luca Visentini, and Philippe Duke. Thank you very much indeed for entering the spirit of doing this very quickly with a lot of questions and a lot of to and fro between you all. And thanks as well to Christian, who had to leave. Let me give you a personal note. I mean, we're doing this work on thinking the unthinkable, where we were warning about the inability and the slowness of many, certainly in the corporate sector and governments, to understand the enormity of what was likely to happen with an enormous threat of disruption. But look at what has happened with COVID. If we'd been talking 3 months ago, I think one would have been quite skeptical. But I think our view very strongly is a lot of very senior leaders in the corporate sector in particular have risen in incredible ways to transform and innovate. And let's hope that that can also happen in the Green Deal and the challenges there are there to both implement it and create a greener Europe and beyond in the rest of the world. Thank you all very much indeed. And thanks to the German Marshall Fund for inviting us all to take part in this. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.